So let's take a look at the strongest army lists in Warhammer 40k right now, with an overview of 10 tournament-stomping army lists being commanded to glory at the enormous events last weekend. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking top 40k army lists, and in this video I thought we'd take a look over some of the best out there in the meta right now, and have a look at what talented players are making work for their respective factions to manage to fight to the top against their peers. Last weekend was a particularly enormous one for Warhammer 40k tournaments. There were 3 absolutely huge events: the Manchester Super Major in the UK at 260 players, Adepticon in the USA at 250, and the Firebug Open in Germany at 150. Basically, whenever you get events of these size, you can really hone in on the armies and players that are doing well. It seems like really quite a good stress test for army lists to me. Basically, when you're competing against this many other people, you both need to have an absolutely top tier army list, and also to command it to near perfection, as small mistakes can cost you big. It looks like the 2 big 250 odd player events did a top cut where it narrowed down to 4 people. I thought we could take a look at all the lists that made that top cut there, and also 3 of the lists for the Firebug one, the 2 undefeated, and also the army that while finishing down the rankings only lost out to the winning list in the last round. Overall, I would say that as competitive 40k goes, this is about as positive as it tends to get. Out of the 11 lists I'll talk about here, 10 of them are from different factions. Plenty of diversity on the tables a little bit below them as well. 40k certainly seems to be in the point where player skill matters a lot more than choice of faction, though obviously there are still some winners and losers, and some factions do play a bit weirdly for how people would like them to. Loads to talk about though, so let's jump right in and take a look at some lists. Starting off with the Manchester Super Major, this one's by Josh Roberts, and commanded the Necrons to victory with their Canoptek constructs, quite refreshingly not choosing to lean on the Catan shards of the Nightbringer or the Void Dragon, which are staples in the vast majority of Necron lists out there. Without the Catan, there's enough room for a fairly maximal amount of Cryptex and Canoptek good stuff. Kind of unsurprising to see 3 big units of Wraiths here with their Particle Casters and Claws led up by 3 Technomancers, enormously durable units that can put out a fair amount of spams damage. One of them takes Dimensional Sanctum to start in the midfield and potentially threaten charges turn 1 if it would be disruptive. Then interestingly, there's a trio of Plasmancers leading a trio of Immortals with Tesla. Kind of fun to see them used en masse. The Plasmancers will give them the Cryptek keyword that allows you to reroll all hit rolls, and given that Immortals get some innate boost to rerolling wound rolls, that's a lot of spammed wounds, even if they can't use the Wombo Combo Devastating Wound stratagem on them anymore. Illuminor might be able to help them out a bit with a touch of AP buffs and debuffs, but otherwise it's just a tough and pretty powerful Necron model in his own right, often hiding with lone operative protection if he can get near other units. Otherwise, there's 2 units of Canoptek Acanthrites. They're the sort of Melter Necrons that can start in the midfield and debuff AP on enemies. That could work quite nicely with the Immortal spam damage, I guess, or help out the Doomstalkers a little bit, but just good to have some midfield control along with the big unit of Wraiths. There's 1 lonely Locust Destroyer, always handy to have those cheap ones around for actions and objectives and things, and then a trio of Canoptek Doomstalkers, nice anti-elite shooting that can chip in against tanks. They're almost always going to be getting those full hit rerolls, and Canoptek Court can really pull out some shenanigans with them, hiding them from enemy shooting, and the Wraiths have access to their reactive movement stratagem that can make them a massive pain to catch up with when they're skirmishing on the midfield objectives. Overall, a very on-theme Canoptek Court list. In order it beats some Vanguard Space Marines, triple Riptide Tau, Custodes, Guard, World Eaters, Admech, and then more Guard in the final. The final admittedly being really quite close. Speaking of which, placing second for the Astra Militarum was David Gaylard of 40k Fireside, once again managing to prove that Guard can work at Super Majors if played to a top level. I certainly recommend checking out their YouTube channel. There's a few videos breaking down similar lists to this in a lot of depth. As ever, this one's taking a lot of cool elements of the Guard army, a pretty ferocious amount of artillery with 2 basilisks that can slow units, and manticores for a bit of damage 3. Just starting out with that amount of indirect firepower can cause massive problems, taking out lightly armoured damage dealers or enemies clinging to objectives. They can be marked by a couple of Scout Sentinels and ordered by Lord Solar Leontus, so potentially can be hitting really accurately indeed with rerolls plus lethal hits because of Born Soldiers. Then there's a good amount of Bulgrim for the front line, 1 unit of 6 and 1 unit of 3, massive defensive stats that can just make a lot of damage disappear between invulnerable saves and other barriers. There's a trio of 10 Kazakin with the Marksman Rifle, Melter Mine, 2 Plasmas and 2 Melters. One trades the Melters for volley guns, and they've got the potential for really interesting double order combos and maybe being recycled with the reinforcement stratagem if necessary. Ursula Creed could help order them and maybe hand out the Fields of Fire to debuff one enemy unit. I'd guess that one of them probably riding that Chimera with the double heavy flamers to get them to the midfield. You could do interesting shenanigans with Ursula Creed and orders out of that as well if you wanted, I think. Finally, there's Lord Solar himself in with an infantry squad and can hand out some orders to things nearby. Doesn't hurt to get one free command point per turn as well. Then a tank commander and a Lehman Russ battle tank to escort it. A tank commander with demolishers and plasmas. The standard Lehman Russ being one that I haven't seen quite as much in competitive lists lately. But it does get some very good rerolls against things on objectives, and you could help it out with Fields of Fire maybe. The tank commander takes Grand Strategist for an extra order to help out some other vehicles. Overall, it's very cool as always to see the guard doing well. The only loss was to the event winning Necrons as mentioned, and it looked like it was very close as per Best Coast pairings, looking like there were only 2 points in it. Otherwise, for armies that made the top cut, there was this Aeldari list by Tony Chu. Really quite an interesting foot dart aspect warrior sort of list for the most part, and packing a fairly obscene amount of fast movers, volume fire, and lone operatives here. This one does look kind of terrifying to close in on with just the sheer amount of movement options and different ways that they can imply damage, even if they don't have an enormous amount of anti-tank heavy lifting and things. There's 2 of the lone operative Autarch Wayleapers, which will keep the command points coming, and one of them takes the Phoenix Gem for resurrecting. They're just great to have as fast-moving lone operatives to do secondaries and disruption. A Death Jester with Fate's Messenger for more lone operative and a particularly deadly Shrieker Cannon. A Farseer Skyrunner apparently running solo. They'll help with the Fate dice and buffs. Fugan the Burning Lance for a bit of anti-tank and being a fairly godly use of a Fate dice to get that big melter to work. And the fast-moving Harlequin Solitaire with the Blitz ability being able to jump all the way up the board and maul something in combat. There's also Barahoth here, who I'm going to guess might lead the big squad of Swooping Hawks, jumping on and off the board with them and laying down a brutal hail of Lasfire. There's then 2 units of Fire Dragons, which could be pretty nasty to step up, maybe one of them alongside Fugan to attack any enemy heavies that get too close. A unit of Rangers that can deploy in the midfield to do a bit of screening if necessary. 4 Harlequin Skyweavers, which are an interesting one that I've not seen run too many times. And then just an absolutely vast amount of the Aeldari fast-moving volume fire units. That big unit of Swooping Hawks and 2 small units, all with lethal hits and 4 Las Blaster shots, and then a big unit of Warp Spiders and 2 units of 5. They can move 24 inches with their Flicker Jump and then just douse you in devastating wound murderous Death Spinner Flamers. Looks like a very high skill list that I really wouldn't begin to know how to command and run optimally. There's just a ridiculous amount of options here between the Aeldari units and their stratagems that they can keep coming in good supply with the Autarchs. Loads of movement tricks, including being able to threaten Phantasm for some game-changing stuff if they have to move short distances to break line of sight. The only loss was to Astra Militarum, who placed second. Finally, for the top cut for the Manchester Super Major was this Adeptus Mechanicus list, run by Richard Grint. This one looks like a fairly horrendous mass bionic wounds board control type list, which maybe slightly depressingly does seem to be the norm for AdMech at the top levels of play. They seem to do board control and just mass 5+ invulnerable save wounds on the board quite a lot better than they do actually destroying enemy units. The detachment is the Skitarii Hunter cohort for the durability buffs at range. There's 3 Skitarii Marshals who take some of the good infiltration and movement shenanigan enhancements, Infiltrator to start in the mid-board, Veiled Hunter for some redeploys, and Battlesphere uplink for a move-shoot-move. I'm guessing that they'd mainly be running with the Vanguard, of which there are a big 6 units of them. I guess 3 of them jumping out of Dune Riders, one of them will be infiltrating, and then there's a unit of Rangers as well for some scouting goodness. That's a lot of bionic wounds on the table, and the special weapons can actually do a bit of work in a pinch if the enemy steps up too quickly. Then, as often seems to be the fashion in these Hunter cohort lists, there's an ungodly amount of Taraxi, 2 units of 5 Skystalkers. They'll be able to do some really big move-shoot moves with so much battle line units on the board, and then 3 units of Taraxi Sterilizers with their mass flamers. They could potentially redeploy off the board if it made sense, and have them winging around into annoying positions all game. Get reactive 5+ feel no pains to make them even more obnoxious to take out, and to guarantee certain units of survival, you could use Shroud Protocols, the one that stops you from being able to shoot a unit outside of 12 inches. Could be really annoying when there's this many wounds on the table. Then there's a small unit of Electro Priests, which could use their move debuff to really annoy one enemy unit on the board. 3 units of Cerberus Raiders for scouting, move shoot move shenanigans, 1 unit of Cerberus Sulphur Hounds with a bunch of volume attacks up close to smash some enemy infantry, and a unit of Sicarian infiltrators to help hold the midfield alongside the presumably infiltrating Vanguard squad. Finally, for some allies, there's Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, who can lead one of the battle line units and stop it being shot outside of a certain distance. She does have at least some fairly good volume fire as well. And it seems there's a regular Inquisitor as well, which I'm going to guess is probably here for the command point farming ability. A chance to refund a command point on a 3+ each time you spend one on this unit. It does mean that you'd have a chance to spam things like can't shoot this unit multiple times, and have a good chance to get that command point back for use elsewhere. Overall, it's just a massive amount of disruption and annoyance units that lots of armies would spend half the game wading through, by which time it might be too late to get ahead on points. It is pretty impressive to see Admech doing well, and big congratulations. Though at the same time, this sort of list being the way to do so isn't going to have many people enthused. It would be nicer if Admech could be made just a little bit more dangerous and not just have to rely on mass board control to win anything. Moving over to the other really big event, and Adepticon was won by Brandon Valley, going 7 wins and 1 draw overall at a big event of 250 players. At the moment, the new Tau Codex won't be in play yet, given that Games Workshop haven't given us official points for it or anything. That'll likely only come when the actual book releases individually, so this is the Index Kauyon detachment. The days of the mass crisis suit cyclic ion blasters are coming to an end, it would seem, though it doesn't stop them taking down this particular tournament with a Cold Star commander heading up a squad of 6 of them, all with maximum cyclic ion blasters, shield drones and shield generators. The Cold Star commander allows them to move really fast and makes their jump shoot jump stratagem more valuable, and from turn 2 he's going to be getting the enormous sustained hits with Exemplar of Kauyon, could be enormous for Overwatch as well. There's also an Enforcer commander here who looks like he's running solo, a big danger in himself with quad cyclic ion blasters and the precision of the Patient Hunter, and enough durability just on his own stat line that he's not going to be incidental to take down. Then to skirmish on the midfield, there's 2 units of 10 Fire Warrior Breachers in Devilfish. They can move quickly and hit the enemy really hard with wound rerolls when they target things in the midfield objective points. There's 2 of these slightly disturbingly cheap Riptides with ion accelerators, plasma rifles and missile drones. 165 points is about the cheapest that they've ever been. Definitely more durability versus damage, but overall I think they're really quite cool now. Could be nice units to have on the front lines given that they can fall back and shoot, plus they are quite a menace to elite infantry. There's 3 stealth suits and 2 units of 2 Tetras that can infiltrate and get boosted guiding for various units. 3 individual Piranhas with fusion blasters and a whole wave of Seeker missiles to start the Alpha Strike with, backed up by a couple of Sky Rays with smart missile systems, providing a bit more long-range anti-tank from the back. Finally, and kind of interestingly, as a little tech piece in the list, there's Dark Strider without any attached Pathfinders at all. Kind of interesting to see him played that way. I guess that's being used for the Jammer Array to deny enemy reserves setting up within 12 inches, which is kind of powerful, I guess. You could have him just solo on a home field objective and know that the opponent can't get to you that way. Plus being a cheap little unit that you could use for secondaries and things. I guess you'd just be gambling on the opponent not having any indirect fire that could splat him quite quickly. Though I guess in that case you could just put him in strategic reserve to do cheap secondaries on the board edges perhaps. In any case, kind of fun to see him being used a bit differently. In any case, really quite a big result for the Tau there. Mr. Valley's list managed to beat Gladius Blood Angels, Votann, Imperial Knights, Orcs, Tau, Demons and Thousand Sons in the final. And it looks like there was a draw to Aeldari in round 3 according to Best Coast pairings. Will be interesting to see how lists like this change in the new Tau Codex with the new detachments on offer. I guess the big Crisis Suit Death Block will be going away, maybe broken down into constituent parts. I have a feeling that Stealth Suits and Sky Rays are going to go nowhere though, given how well their datasheets improved. Placing in second at Adepticon was TJ Lanigan's Thousand Sons, going 7-1 and only losing out to the winning Tau. Thousand Sons do seem to be doing pretty well for themselves on the tournament scene at the moment. There's certainly some of the absolute staple units here like Magnus and Araman leading up the list. Magnus just as the big linchpin psychic damage dealer and psychic buffing unit, Araman for the free Kabbalistic ritual and +1 to wound. With the +1 to wound I'd guess that he is leading one of the 2 Rubik Marine squads, of which there are actually surprisingly few, with 1 unit of 10 and 1 unit of 5, all bearing Warp Flamers. I'm not sure which of the many other characters are leading the other squad. I'd guess perhaps the Exalted Sorcerer with the Umbrellific Crystal to teleport one thing around, and then there's 2 Exalted Sorcerers on discs. flying around quite quickly and potentially binding enemy units to slow them down massively, and an Infernal Master with the Arcane Vortex enhancement, meaning that his firepower is extra nasty. Otherwise though, compared with a lot of competitive Thousand Sons lists, there's really quite a few chaff units, 1 unit of Zangors, 3 units of 3 Enlighten with the Great Bows, and 1 unit of 10 Cultists, quite a lot of expendable screens and secondary doers there. 1 Mutalith Vortex Beast that can be good for doubling the range of rituals, as well as providing a bit of an all-or-nothing anti-tank ruination shot. And perhaps the single most interesting choice is a Winged Demon Prince with Lord of Forbidden Law. I guess he's being used almost like an enormous and scary Thousand Sons Calidus assassin, jumping on and off the board, doing secondaries if needed, and can also threaten another Kabbalistic ritual. Depending on how many points are left on the board, you could threaten double Doom Bolt, or movement after deep striking or something. I feel like his damage and defense aren't super great for the points cost, but that's definitely a model with loads of options. Overall, a very skill dependent list there, as ever with Thousand Sons, and it only lost out to the event winning Tau. Next up, we've got another entry for the Tomb Worlds, though a completely different list. This one's Hypercrypt Necrons and was used by Sean Reynolds to place 3rd, only losing out to the Thousand Sons. This one's Hypercrypt Necrons, so are jumping on and off the board. And there's 4 enormous threats in the list in the Monolith with Death Rays, plus 3 different Catan shards, the Nightbringer, Void Dragon, and Transcendent Catan. Certainly the Nightbringer and Void Dragon are near auto-include status for the vast majority of Necron competitive lists. Just ridiculous levels of damage and defense that their slow mobility doesn't really matter too much, and in Hypercrypt even less so, with jumping to the front lines and threatening 3-inch deep strikes on the go. The Monolith takes some Death Rays for some heavy firepower and can be a linchpin of the list, doing some big teleport shenanigans with those Necron warrior blocks if it wants to. Speaking of which, it is very cool to see someone managing to make Necron warriors work. They haven't been played competitively very much since the Codex came out. 2 big blocks of 20 of them with Gauss Reapers, lots of objective control, and it looks like they're well supported by Cryptex and a Royal Warden with Warlord traits. Looks like there's a particularly savage looking combo with the Plasmancer with Arisen Tyrant coming out. That'll mean you get lethal hits with those Gauss Flares on a 5+, and gets to re-roll the hit roll when you've set up from Deep Strike or Hyperphase. So basically you've got a 20 squad of Necron warriors where more wounds than not are going to be auto-wounding the enemy. There's also a Chronomancer who's particularly interesting in this detachment, allowing units to deep strike or strategic reserve onto the board and then also get a secondary move to get places that they normally can't, and a Royal Warden that can ensure his units against getting locked up in close combat, so those Necron warriors can tank some damage, step back and shoot, and he's got the Osteoclave Fulcrum for full range deep strike. Very useful in this one. I'm not 100% sure which of the Cryptex he pairs with. On paper both of them could be very interesting. Otherwise, there's also Illuminor Seraz for the AP buffs and debuffs for those warriors. Could be extra nasty with AP2 Gauss Reapers getting all of those lethal hits. And as with the last one, he's just a good character in his own right. And then 3 individual Locust Destroyers that could hold the backfield for cheap or do secondaries for cheap. Particularly in Hypercrypt, they can be warpy around the board doing secondary objectives, while the rest of the list focuses on damage and holding the midfield. It's quite cool to see 2 different Necron army lists going about winning in quite such different ways. Very nice to see Necron warriors having some success on the table. I feel like the days of Catan spam are probably going to be slightly numbered though. It's hard to imagine them not getting a points bump in the next data slate. Finally, for the top cost at Adepticon, there's a beautiful, simple and violent Chaos Demons list. This one run by a Kevin Leonard, using it to take 4th. The only loss here was to those event-winning Tau. This one really is kind of awesome in just a brass stampede of Cornate Juggernauts. 3 Skullmasters, the Herald on the Juggernauts, leading up 3 big units of 6 Blood Crushers, each of those basically being units that you really don't want to get in the way of at all. The Blood Crushers hit home with a whole bunch of volume attacks with lots of strength 5 damage too, and bladed horns with lance from the Juggernauts. They also have a good chance of dealing lots of mortal wounds as well, lots of D3 mortal wound impact hits, and they are genuinely quite tanky to take out as well, with toughness 7, 4 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save. That's all backed up by the Skullmaster, who can be another model for those impact hits, gives them devastating wounds with the Juggernaut horns, and perhaps most importantly contributes a whole load of quality strength 6 damage 3 attacks to help lay low enemy elites. Potentially he can get +1 to wound as well. If he makes the enemy fail a battle shock test, you could use Draft of Terror to then double down on a +1 to wound against them, which is quite a big deal. They should be protected from shooting from the early game from Be'lakor, who can make them untargetable outside of 18 inches, as well as being a fairly mighty threat in himself, and projecting a bubble of the shadow of chaos around himself, potentially allowing you some close range deep strikes. As if that weren't quite enough threat though, there's also a Ren Master on a Blood Throne. They can mark one enemy unit within 18 inches to improve the strength, AP, and damage characteristics of your attacks against that unit, and that is just absolutely monstrous on those big combined damage profiles of the Blood Crusher units. It should mean that that one unit marked for death should be absolutely ruined. Finally, to back that all up, for some objectives and secondary doing, there's 3 units of 5 Flesh Hounds and 3 Skull Cannons. They can also hand out Battle Shock if it's relevant, and I guess the Skull Cannons can help defend their home objectives too. Overall, it really is pretty cool to see an army of pure Khorne fast movers and damage dealers do quite so well. Really looks like a list that you'd have to do your absolute best to try and mitigate the massive threats of those Blood Crushers, while bearing in mind all the sneaky things that Demons can do with redeployment and deep strike and things when they need to. Finally, moving on to the last of the 3 events, I thought for the Firebug Grand Tournament we'd talk about the 2 undefeated ones, and also the list that lost to this list as the overall winner in the last round of the tournament. First up, we've got an army list of Black Templars playing Ironstorm. In reality, this one feels a lot more akin to a more generic Space Marine army list, with just Black Templars adding some value from efficient tactical marine equivalents, plus some bolt-on multi-melters. It's certainly not the only way to do well with Black Templars though. Their Righteous Crusaders detachment is very strong as well. This one was run by a Kevin Zollinger, who used it to take first, beating out a surprisingly consistent string of Guard, then Death Guard, then Custodes, Custodes, Death Guard, and more Custodes. Basically anything that's Guard or a Guardian seems to have been killed by this list in spades. Heading up the list are a trio of Tech Marines bearing the 3 good enhancements. They've got Adept of the Omnissiah, Master of Machine War, and Target Augury Web. Between those, that's the Cancel a Failed Save, really quite a big defensive enhancement, Master of Machine War to advance and shoot and fall back and shoot, and the Scary Target Augury for all the lethal hits. I'm sure the Gladiator Reapers or Predators will be absolutely loving that. Crazy value in those, never mind the fact that they give each vehicle +1 to hit and heal D3 wounds as well. For the big gun tanks that they're buffing, there's 3 Gladiator Reapers with the Black Templar multi-melter bolted on top, scary volume fire tanks that absolutely pulverize enemies. I did do a video review of the Gladiator tanks here on the channel. The Reapers in particular with their devastating wounds are great at killing hordes, but also massively powerful at laying low things like Terminator targets. Mass stacked saves and devastating wounds will do that. Then there's 3 Predator Destructors, fielded in what in my opinion is the right way, autocannon and 2 las cannon sponsons there. The las cannons making great use of the built-in Ironstorm rerolls, and the autocannon is just very general purpose threatening. It's still very good against vehicles. There's then a Repulsor Executioner with the Laser Destroyer and the Black Templar multi-melter, and a nice tanky Ballistas Dreadnought for some longer range shooting. All of those vehicles have just got some terrifying stratagems that they can use, things like returning fire when you drop them to less than half health, and the very scary 5+ critical hit stratagem that they can get, meaning that they'll have sustained and lethal hits on their target, and you can just give that to the unit that matters the most, whether you're trying to take down enemy vehicles or enemy infantry. Really nice to combine with Oath of Moment as well. Then for objective support, there's a fair few bodies to take down the midfield. There's 4 units of 5 Firstborn Crusader squads packed into 2 Rhinos, just ridiculously efficient tactical marine equivalents that put the generic tactical marine datasheet to shame. Each of those squads of 5 gets a Melty Gun, Multi-Melter, Inferno Pistol, and a Thunder Hammer, so loaded to the nines with gear, and gear that really likes the Ironstorm rerolls as well. Just weird that they can be so cheap and tough with all of that firepower. Finally, there's a unit of 5 scouts for a little bit of screening in the midboard, taking a missile launcher and shotguns. Overall, an utterly scary damage-dealing firepower type list. Pretty much all of the big danger tanks are at least fairly general purpose. Even the Gladiator Reapers will be chipping things off hard targets between devastating wounds and multi-melters. A fairly godly amount of support, and some really good objective holding as well. Black Templars can certainly get on well with Ironstorm with the use of their unique datasheets. Otherwise, also coming in undefeated at the same event are the leagues of Votann. This list by Max Cantor took second, and despite the big points increase on the Sagittars going up to 115, it doesn't stop 6 of them being strong, it would seem. Big spam of the Votann scouting transport here with the tank-busting high-las beam cannon with a sustained hit. All of those having scouts can be really quite good for getting the alpha strike on the enemy as well, potentially hiding the vehicles if you go second, or moving up the boards to get their transport contents onto midfield objectives and getting in good positions to strike turn 1. They do move fast. Filling those transports are 2 units of Chthonian Berserks, 1 unit of 10 Hearthkin, split down the middle to fill out 2 transports, and 2 Grimnirs with their psychic shooting. The Berserks can go on to be a nice countercharge melee threat with those concussion mauls. The Grimnirs are just generally quite dangerous, and the Hearthkin can mark objectives with their sticky objectives rule. They take a Magna Rail rifle and the Hylas auto gun. Then, as if the Sagittars weren't quite enough scouting, there's a massive amount of Hernkin, 2 units of 6 with Hylas rotary cannons and all the upgrades, and 1 unit of 3. There's enough firepower there to really threaten to sweep even quite durable infantry units right off the board. And certainly could take big chunks out of enemy heavy hitters as well, given the +1 to hit and wounds they're likely to have on the most important stuff. Finally, a Votann list wouldn't really be complete without a big unit of Einhir Hearthguard. Looks like this one's led by a Carl, lightly deep striking in and spamming loads of Vulcanite devastating wounds, a bunch of grenade fire, and then striking with concussion gauntlets in close combat. They're a really hard unit to go wrong with in Votann, and a good target for the big sustained hit stratagem that they can get. The Carl takes the appraising glare enhancement. Overall, it's a very scouty and threatening Votann list. Lots of mobility, with the vast majority of the army moving much faster than you'd expect for the Space Dwarves. Feels like you could play this list very differently depending on matchups, either going for big alpha strikes when it's necessary to deal knockout blows, or playing a bit more cagey with the scout things. Finally, last and kind of a bonus mention for this video, I thought it would be worth talking about the army list of Adeptus Custodes that got beaten by the Ironstorm Spearhead Black Templars. They only lost in the last round against that list, and the margins were kind of close. It looks like it was 85 plays 75 on Best Coast pairings, so there was a very credible chance of this list going undefeated. This one was by a Pascal Harbistro, and it's a pretty scary character-heavy list of Adeptus Custodes, going really heavy on the Custodian Wardens datasheet. There's 3 big units of 5 of them with Spears and Vexilla. They're the tanky Custodians that like to escort characters. Provided they've got a leader in the unit, they get a -1 to wound, and they've got that very, very big turn when they can just get a 4+ feel no pain against all their attacks, making them monstrously hard to kill when they just want to buckle down and not die. Being able to take max Guardian Spears without compromising on the Vexilla is kind of cool as well. I'm not 100% sure which ones would have been leading them versus the extra unit of Custodian Guard, but there's 2 Blade Champions here that just have very nasty damage 3 attacks in close combat, plus can be a good way of delivering Custodians to melee at long range as well. There's a Shield Captain with a Guardian Spear who can get you some free stratagems on the go, nice for threatening things like the -1 damage, and Trajan Valoris himself with his Moment Shackle to fight first, and the big hitting damage 3 attacks in close combat. He also ignores modifiers and tends to be a big staple for Custodes. I guess one of those 4 will be leading one of the units of Custodian Guard. There's one with quad spears and one that takes a Vexilla and shield. One of those 2 will be headed up by Kyria Draxus, who is a very popular pick for the Custodes. She gets the can't be shot at greater than 18 inches rule, and also contributes really quite a considerable amount of shooting that could be allowed to shoot twice and get rerolls against enemies on objectives, making her pair amazingly with the Custodian Guard. Otherwise, there's a unit of 2 Alarus Custodians that can teleport around the board for some early threat or doing secondaries, 1 cheap unit of Witch Seekers that can scout into the midfield if desired, and a Calidus Assassin to go bounding around the board doing secondary objectives and ruin 1 enemy battle tactic stratagem while the rest of the army gets stuck in. Overall, maybe not too enormously different from other Custodians winning lists. Perhaps the biggest choices here are the Mass Wardens versus more Custodian Guard and Terminators, and perhaps being slightly more character heavy as a result, given that you want leaders for all of them. In any case, I'll leave that there. Hope you've enjoyed a quick look at a few of the scariest lists in Warhammer 40k, and as per always, feel free to let me know any corrections or any other insights as to how these were played. There's definitely a lot of high skill lists with tricksy units here that I'm probably missing some of the best potential of. In any case though, I was kind of pleasantly surprised that there's quite such a variety of units making their way to the tops of tournaments here. It's certainly a lot better than it has been at many times in 40k's past. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k content coming. I do tend to post new videos just about every day, often twice a day if possible. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's the main way that I can keep these videos coming quite so regularly. So if you are enjoying a lot, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.